How's it going, gamers? Today I'm going to be upgrading my 2006 Mac Pro from the puny dual-core CPUs to the not-so-blazing fast quad-cores. Specifically, I'm changing from a Xeon 5130 to a 5355. Not only will this double my core count, it will also be clocked higher at 2.6 GHz. I bought these CPUs for less than $15 on eBay, and I'm hoping that this will improve the Mac Pro's gaming capability. As you can see here, to change out the CPUs you must remove several components, starting out with the RAM. After I pulled out both RAM cards, I took out the graphics card. I've been using this trusty ASUS GTX 960 for my testing today. After that, the fan housing and metal trim pieces must come out. The only thing left in the way are the heatsinks. The heatsinks are secured with 4 Allen screws. After removing the heatsinks, you are given access to both CPU sockets. And each heatsink has a temperature sensor that you have to unplug. Removing the CPUs is the same as any other Intel socket. You just push down the little arm and flip up the metal bracket. After that, they pull right out. Another thing I noticed was how hard the thermal paste had turned after these years. Even if you don't upgrade the CPUs in your Mac Pro, it could be a good idea to change out the thermal paste. Probably affecting the performance. I cleaned up the heatsinks and applied new thermal paste to the CPUs. And here I'm getting ready for the comments about how much thermal paste I'm using. But whatever, I'm using some Thermal Grizzly paste that I had laying around. Probably the most difficult part of the CPU swap was the heatsinks. You're supposed to use a long 3mm Allen wrench, but I don't have one of those, so I made do with a shorter ball end Allen. So now the final steps are putting the RAM back in and inserting the graphics card. If you're wondering, I have a total of 24 gigs of RAM, 4 sticks of 4 and 4 sticks of 2. I put the 960 back in and plug it in, and then now it's ready to boot up. And look at that, surprisingly it booted to Windows on my first try. After my first boot up, it oddly enough still showed that the processor was the 5130, but after taking out the CMOS battery and then a couple reboots, it showed the correct CPU. You can see the 8 CPU cores show up on Task Manager, as well as the increased cache size and clock speed. To test the new CPU, I used a combination of Cinebench and 3D Mark. The old CPU had a Cinebench score of 981, while the new CPU had a score of 2470. On 3D Mark, the old CPU scored 381, while the new CPU scored 1031. Here I have a couple clips of 3D Mark running, but the FPS is so bad that it qualifies as a slideshow. This is on the combined test, so any improvement in CPU performance should hopefully be visible here. But when I tested the new CPU, the performance almost looks worse, so I'm not quite sure what's going on there. Part of this could be because I'm using a GTX 960 for testing, but I tried a couple games and it still had issues with stuttering. When it came to gaming, the results were not so good. The stock Mac Pro had a score of 5027, and the new CPU only increased it to a score of 5119. In the future, I'm going to look into overclocking and reducing the latency, but I believe the Mac Pro is on its last legs.